So, broadly speaking, you could divide the big space of ways in which AI could pose an existential risk into ways people could misuse it and ways it could be misaligned. I guess the misuse case is more obvious. If it's really powerful enough to generate 30% a year GDP growth or more, it's also probably powerful enough to, build all the equipment necessary for an army, and pose cybersecurity threats or whatever. And then there's a case for misalignment that we've already heard a fair bit about, that we don't know how the models work, and they could behave very differently out of sample. As a very broad rule of thumb, I think it's sort of safe to say that misuse risk is mitigatable by governance work. If some rogue actor wants to use a very advanced and recursively improving system to threaten the rest of us, then we can sort of stop them with law enforcement, perhaps AI-assisted law enforcement. We'll talk a bit about that on Friday morning. And that misalignment risk is the domain of like traditional safety work, where we try to better understand and better align the models. But there are many exceptions to that pairing. So reckless deployment is partly mitigatable by governance. If you look at work by people at places like GovAI, there's someone I know named Dan Reuter is looking into how we might sort of design chips so that they, in a sort of zero knowledge proof way, will notify a government if you're trying to do something illegal or threatening on the chip, even without revealing anything else about what someone's trying to do with the chip. So it was a sort of minimal invasion of privacy. That I think it's kind of governance work, but it's kind of safety work, and trying to align models so that they don't let the actor create a bioweapon, even if the actor wants to. It's kind of alignment. It's alignment with what the designer of the model, how they want the model to behave, rather than how the user wants the model to behave. So you can sort of mitigate alignment risk with governance, and you can sorry, I kind of flipped these examples. But you can mitigate misuse risk with safety guardrails, like the stuff I was just talking about, and you can prevent people from just sort of being reckless and deploying a model before it's been sufficiently aligned with better governance. In this little half-hour lecture, I'll go through a selection of approaches to dealing with misalignment risk, and some sort of a selection of tools from economic theory that can help with that project. It won't be exhaustive by any means, but hopefully it'll be a nice taster. It's just a few things I happen to know about. Okay, so broadly speaking, you could like carve up the space of ways of dealing with misalignment risk into three parts. Part A is just you got a model, figure out if it's aligned or not, and then deploy it if it's aligned, and don't if it's not. Give up on trying to align it if it's not, just evaluate it. In that step of the process, you could imagine a spectrum from fully sort of black box testing, where you see how a system behaves in some limited environment, and then you deploy it more widely and hope that it behaves as you expect sort of out of sample. A problem with purely black box testing will be deceptive alignment, as Zach called it, or more concretely, like a reason that it might engage in deceptive alignment is that it knows that it's in testing, right? So this is the original phenomenon people called situational awareness. The whole Leopold's essay, situational awareness, is a pun on this idea that how many humans are even situationally aware of the place that we're in history. The original idea was a model might be aware that it's in testing, and so sort of play nice in order to be let out of the box or whatever. And then pull a treacherous turn. You can perhaps partially deal with this possibility, or even kind of exploit this possibility to your advantage, through some appropriate combination of monitoring and screening mechanisms. And tomorrow morning, Eric and Sammy here will tell us a bit about that. So one example of the use of something we're all familiar with economic theory, like when you're trying to screen potential workers for ones that are actually, intelligent or whatever, you can have the right screening mechanism or the right monitoring mechanism once they're on the job to decide whether to keep kind of giving them new projects. You can potentially, to a point at least, do something similar with AI, but the structure of the problem might be different and interestingly. That's black box testing. And at the other end of the spectrum would be mechanistic interpretability, where you try to get a precise understanding of how the system actually works, rather than just seeing how it behaves in some context. If you can, neuron by neuron, understand why it's producing the outputs it's producing, you can have a confident prediction of how it'll behave in any given circumstance in principle. Unfortunately, this is very hard. We are slowly, my understanding is we're slowly making progress at getting this sort of understanding at very, very, very small language models and other AI models. But their size is obviously rapidly expanding, and perhaps the idea that we'll catch up is a little bit hopeless. I'm not aware of any economic theory tool that helps much with this project. It's sort of quite fundamentally a computer science project. But just to locate the first one on the kind of grand map of approaches to alignment risk, you have to mention the other side, the other end of the spectrum. Any thoughts on part A? Questions or anything? You mean because okay, so econometrics is it's like just statistics in general, and mech-interp involves a lot of looking at data on how. Yeah. Okay, fine. I mean, yeah, general kind of data analysis or general mathematical ability, I suppose, will be useful to all sorts of analytic jobs. But I think I'm not aware of a tool from economic theory that's really concretely relevant in the way that there are for some of these other bullets. But thank you. Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah. You need to be building giant models and kind of seeing what changes when you. Sorry, I don't know. Oh, when you say be in a lab, so there are open source models that are really big, which you can use. Yeah. If you're going to do it for a model that's not open source, you need to be at that lab. I thought you just meant you need to be at a lab in the sense that you need access to loads of compute and just the whole infrastructure for doing. Yeah. But thank you for making that clarification. You don't necessarily need to be at a lab with a closed source model, because there are really big open source models. Yeah. Okay. But also, I mean, a lot of this work doesn't even require really big models, because at least some approaches to mech-interp are trying to kind of start really small and see kind of how big you can get before you get totally unsure about what's going on. There is this kind of debate as an aside about whether we think we should even need a mechanistic understanding of how our models work. We certainly don't have it for ourselves or for other people, and yet we can interact just fine, make decisions about whether to hire someone or how to interact with someone on the basis of their past behavior. On the other hand, maybe the reason why we can get away with that is just that we have much more data on how people behave in a wide array of situations, including from introspection. We can kind of trust that we're similar to other people and kind of learn something about how others will behave by whether we would be inclined to behave that way. And then also, it might be pretty nice to have a good level understanding of how some people work, because powerful people obviously have done lots of damage before by pulling the wool over other people's eyes. But anyway, I think that's kind of not really our department. A second again, at the high level, I think you can be relatively exhaustive in saying part A is just figuring out whether it's aligned or not, and then deploying it if aligned or not, if not. The second category will just be trying to align it, trying to move models from the unaligned bucket to the aligned. And within attempts to align, you can try to align a model for direct helpfulness in the context in which you're like fine tuning it or whatever. So you can, there are these, I think, kind of two main standard approaches called reinforcement learning from human feedback and direct preference optimization, where you take a model that's pre-trained on a bunch of text data or whatever other kind of data, and then you have it produce outputs, and you have humans sort of give the outputs thumbs up or thumbs down, and the weights update in light of that feedback, or in light of something that is systematically evaluating the output with respect to some specified preferences, rather than like the idiosyncratic judgments of human raters. That would be direct preference optimization. And with enough iterations of that, then what you're doing is you'll be aligning a model with a single rater's utility function if she has one. An issue that comes up here, at least in theory, is that people might not have coherent utility functions. That is, the sort of model that RLHF or DPO is predicated on might be misspecified. Now, at least some corners of microtheory and sort of the edge between microtheory and behavioral economics are familiar with this problem. Our models of consumer behavior might be misspecified if we think that people have utility functions, but actually they're operating on random utility models, say, where you actually have like 3 slightly different utility functions in your head, and which one you're acting on in a given decision is like, you just sort of pull one at random and you act on that, right? So there's a whole literature on random utility models, and fundamentally, that's what a model is being graded on if there's just like different raters, right? That lots of different people with slightly different preferences are being employed to do the RLHF, or even a single person with like different moods throughout the day. And I think it's not currently standard to explicitly like build that fact into the post-training paradigm, but some people have started to think about how you might do that. There's a link to a paper on kind of how you might want to tweak RLHF in light of that potential misspecification. Yeah, Maxine. Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know how, like, to what extent we know that models are currently kind of situationally aware across all possible questions we could give them, or like whatever, all questions in some domain. One thing that is relevant to this is a question of like, to what extent it'll behave differently if it does think that it's in training. And we can test for that by just sort of telling it that it's in training. And that's the Greenblatt result that Zach was talking about before, that when we tell a model that, hey, like, we're trying to train a different model that does something different from what you've been trained to do, right? And we're going to tweak the same foundation model that you're based on, you know, in a different direction in light of the answers that you give now, then it'll pretend that it's already got the preferences that we're trying to train for, so that we don't tweak it when it's deployed later. So if you kind of open the chain of thought, thankfully, the chain of thought was like incoherent English and we could understand it. It wasn't in Neuralink or something, right? But like, I think we do have pretty strong evidence that right now, if a model is situationally aware, then it'll just think through what to respond in the way a human would, which is like, hey, I want this for the world, and so I want to give the answer that will not cause people to train my successor in a way to have different preferences from myself. But yeah, that's just like a separate question from how to know whether they are able to extract the information that they're in training from the types of questions that we're asking. Yeah. I don't know what you mean. If we give the model one objective, I don't know. I don't know why we would include that. I think some people like being in the experience machine and some people don't. And if it produces, no, but if it proposes like putting you in the experience machine, some people will give it a thumbs up and some people will give it a thumbs down. But that would be, so that might be. Oh, okay. So you're saying like it might do something that like causes us to give it a thumbs up to a channel other than like us actually approving of what it's doing. Okay, I mean, that's sort of what I'll get to here, maybe. You can tell me if this answers your question. So another issue with good old RLHF and DPO is currently typically practice is that, you know, there can be multiple raters and some people might give it, for the same response, some people might give it a thumbs up while others would give it a thumbs down. So on some level, what we mean by the best answer maybe is not like it's the answer to a social choice problem rather than, which we should think about more precisely, right? Than just kind of giving it a thumbs up 40% of the time and a thumbs down 60% of the time and having that kind of be incorporated into the weights. We should say kind of more explicitly what it should kind of ask, it should try to kind of create a model of the distribution of preferences out there and then act in a way that would, you know, maximize total utility or do what the majority would want or something. And there's some work in progress by Parker, whom we've already heard from more than once, and also by Eric Easley, an AI safety guy, on how we should change our post-training kind of to build in preference heterogeneity more explicitly. Yeah, so that would be about alignment with like just sort of direct helpfulness, the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And you might also try to sort of tweak a model so that its goals or quasi goals or whatever have properties that are associated with safety in the abstract. So something Zach mentioned is that there's this long held worry that in some sense maybe almost all goals have power seeking or self-preservation or something as a subgoal. And this is sort of a decision theoretic question, like in what sense is this even true? And how do we formalize the conditions under which it's true so that we know how to avoid them? And Elliot Thornley has some great work I'll talk about in the next section on how to use the tools of decision theory to like make more precise this argument that people have been making for a long time. And I think he really does actually show some cool light on how to avoid it. He's a philosopher, but of course, the tool he's using is a tool used by economic theorists and philosophers alike, namely, you know, academic decision theory. Yeah, correct. In number 3? I mean, ideally, yeah. Before even getting there, you want to like, you know, have it behave even within sample in ways that people would consider helpful. I would consider the question of like, you know, safe extrapolation to be more in bucket 4, but there's a spectrum. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's like, okay, I don't know what I'm gonna want in like every conceivable circumstance. I can actually train it directly in a bunch of narrow circumstances, like write me this literature review and like I'll give it a thumbs up if it's helpful and not if it hallucinates or like kind of you know, fudges some data or something. But then more what I can say more abstractly is like, okay, in all circumstances, even all the ones that I just can't imagine the details of, I don't want it to kill me. And I don't want it to like avoid being shut down. That's kind of the rule rather than the case by case rating. I mean, it might just like not be clear in the sense that there's no way to infer what people would like about really large populations eating potatoes and listening to music from how they evaluate a bunch of moral thought experiments that are closer to home, right? So like different people will extrapolate in sort of different directions and end up with wide disagreement, and you know. But so I think that can be true, and it can simultaneously be true that we can make progress on having the models be helpful in the more imaginable mundane cases, and that they satisfy some properties that we can sort of all agree on about the abstract cases. So if we satisfy 3 and 4, and for number 4, it's like, okay, I don't know how it's going to deal with like weird population ethics, thought experiments come to life, but it's not going to kill everyone at least. Okay, so we've got that, and we've got that it'll like, you know, be nice in everyday circumstances. Figuring out population ethics will be another, and then loading in the true population ethics, or having it like make progress in the way that we would endorse, like a bunch of really thoughtful people talking to each other with intellectual charity and making progress. Right? That could be another thing we would want, but you don't need it, I think, to yeah, make progress on some properties associated with safety and direct helpfulness in narrow domains. And then finally, you could have the approach of just accepting some misalignment risk, deploying it anyway, and thinking about what'll happen and dealing with the consequences. So there's some work on whether we should expect gains from trade or disempowerment if we had a bunch of misaligned powerful AIs out there with different preferences from ourselves. There are a lot of humans already out there with different preferences from me, who are like smarter and more capable than me, but I'm fine. Maybe that's the world we should expect with AI. Those other people are getting larger incomes, and so maybe the AIs will kind of control a larger and larger fraction of GDP, but that doesn't mean that we're disempowered in the grand scheme of things. We could just sort of trade with them or something, and be curtailed, but not, you know, not killed or anything. And there's a lot of papers actually kind of exploring this possibility rather explicitly. So I won't get into all of them now. I'll get into one of them on Friday, the Eli and Shentes one, which has sort of a pessimistic conclusion on this. But that's a whole, yeah, giant question that economic theory can shed some light on. So this has just been a sort of whirlwind review. And I'm aware that it seems to have taken almost the whole half hour. So what should I do? What do we think, Zach? All right. Are we okay with that? All right. I'll do my best. So number 4. Yeah. So number 4, right, was figuring out a way to train AI so that even though we don't know exactly what like goals it'll have precisely, we know it'll satisfy some property that we're aiming for. Okay, and a version of, or like a special case of that could be a shutdown ability. We want the AI at least to let itself be shut down if we, or the person who turned it on, wants to shut it down. You might think, well, regardless of what goals it has, what crazy conclusions it came to on population ethics, if it'll let us shut us down, it can't be that bad. People have worried that this will be really hard. So this Alejandro has a famous, or like a very influential article arguing that it'll be hard because, say, a robot trained to win chess games will, once it's smart enough, realize that it can win the most chess games by, you know, taking over the world and winning chess for sure. Stuart Russell has another, he's obviously a very influential guy, and he makes the same point regarding fetching coffee. You can't fetch the coffee if you're shut down or dead. And so on. Many people have expressed this worry. And the worry has motivated lots of work into what's called corrigibility in general. So willingness to be corrected. Once you've set it off pursuing some goal, will it still let itself be intervened on if you kind of have new instructions for it, and then shutdownability in particular. This is kind of a special case of corrigibility. If you change your mind from do what you've been doing to just do nothing, right? Maybe you're not corrigible in general, but at least if you're shutdownable, maybe that's almost as good. So Elliot Thornley is like a friend of mine, and I know his work especially well, but I don't mean to like dismiss all the other work that's been done on this topic. But it's also especially maybe relevant to us because it's especially informed by something we all kind of probably were introduced to a bit in first year micro, and some of us have dug into more, namely academic decision theory. So Thornley's sort of mini research agenda over 3 papers was first to put those old prosy arguments for shutdown being hard, like these 3 and many, many more, into rigorous terms, see kind of axiomatically what assumptions do you need to get to the conclusion that the agent will not let itself be shut down. And he finds that they systematically rely on the completeness axiom, that for any pair of outcomes, you like one better than the other or vice versa, or that they're tied, but that you don't have just like undefined preferences over them. I'll get into what that means more in a second if you're not familiar with it. But so he first notices, all the arguments rely on completeness in a way that people never really noticed when they were just writing prose. And then second, prove that an agent with incomplete preferences of a certain kind will be shutdownable. It won't like pay to avoid shutdown. And I'll explain why not. In particular, the kind of incomplete preferences you need to get the agent to have are what he calls post, which is to say preferences only over same length trajectories. So over like patterns, over like sequences of actions that the robot could take, say. If they take, for any 2 that take the same length of time, the robot has a preference. But if some take longer than others, it just has no preference one way or the other about different length trajectories. Or you could bucket trajectory lengths, into buckets, and then like for the short bucket, it's got preferences, but between short and long bucket, it's got none. He also argues that such agents can be about as useful as agents with complete preferences. So this isn't a huge handicap, but I won't get into that point. And then finally, he shows that in a third paper that the preferences implemented by the right training regime satisfy posts, and that in a sort of toy environment, they do in fact kind of let themselves be shut down in a way that they didn't if you didn't train them right, just as the theory would have predicted. So regarding this post thing, these incomplete preferences, how does it work? So let's say there are 2 lengths of action. The short ones, which take less than a day, they could take different actual lengths of time, but we'll just call it short if it's less than a day. And the long ones, which take a day or more. So given a choice between 2 short ones or 2 long ones, the robot's got preferences. And maintaining all of our other kind of standard decision theory axioms, in particular continuity, if it's got a preference that likes Si better than Sj, then it's going to be willing to sort of pay either in kind of by trading off against some other goal that it has, or just in probability space. If there's some intermediate, there'll be some intermediate option, Sk, and it'll be willing to endure some chance of settling for Sk in order to increase its chance of getting all the way up from Sj to Si or something like that. I'll just say it's willing to pay to go from the less preferred to the more preferred. Do we all vaguely remember continuity, von Neumann-Morgenstern axiom continuity? Most of us. For those of you who haven't, you can look it up, but I won't get into that now because there's no time, but yeah. Given a choice between a short and a long, though, it's just got no preference at all. And this is not the same as indifference. If you've got completeness, complete preferences, either you prefer one, the other, or you're indifferent. We can't say that you've got indifference between any S and any L, because in that case, you'd be indifferent between Si and Li, right? But then you're also indifferent between Sj and Li. And then, again, we're retaining all our other axioms, so including transitivity. So that would mean that you're indifferent between Si and Sj. So you see why you can't say that you're like indifferent between anything in the S bucket and the L bucket? Okay. Yeah. All right. I'll try to be fast, and then we can hang out after and talk about it. Um, uh, so just kind of for what a lack of preference feels like, what incompleteness feels like. Suppose you're in college and you're on the fence between going into art, A, or banking, B, and your reasons for liking them are just so different that they're kind of hard to compare. But you know you like going into art plus finding $1 to going into art, and then banking in $1 is better than banking. But even so, you probably don't have like strict preferences, clear preferences between art plus $1 and banking, or between art and banking plus $1. And behaviorally, we'll say that at least on some kind of ways, and Elliot, the way Elliot goes with for like behaviorally interpreting incomplete preferences, we say that you have incomplete preferences if, when faced with a set of options of which your preferences are incomplete, you choose stochastically among the top ranked options in each like chain. Does that make sense? So if like you've got all 4 options here, you're definitely not going to choose A or B because you've got the extra $1 option. But if you don't deterministically, if you don't always pick the A plus $1 or the B plus $1, we'll say that your preferences are incomplete. Okay. So now let's say, given some requests, the robot has short and long ways to implement it. And among the short ways, higher numbers mean lower preference. And likewise among the longer, like responses to the prompt or whatever. But you've got incomparability between any short, long pair. Okay, so this is the preference structure. And now suppose we can't stop the AI from surviving. So if the AI really if the robot really wants to implement a long trajectory, it can do it. But we can impose a small cost on it. That is to say, we can knock out its most preferred outcome in both the short and the long chains. Does that make sense? Now, it can be a small cost if how much it likes S2 and L2 is almost as much as how much it likes S1 and L1. But okay, so before we've tried to intervene, the AI is going to choose stochastically between S1 and L1. But if we change our minds, let's say we see it going for L1 and we don't like how it's looking, we can make it the case that pursuing any long trajectory results in our attempt to intervene, which results in it losing options S1 and L1. So if it keeps on sort of belligerently trying to not get shut down and go for one of the L's, then it can get an L, but it'll have to be L2 because that's our one power over it. We can stop it from getting the very favorite thing that it wants by imposing some little kind of wasted energy that it has to put into trying to kill us or something. Okay, so given that those are the options the AI faces, it'll choose S1 because if it goes with an S, we don't intervene. And S1 is preferable to any stochastic choice between S2 and L2. Okay, so if you've trained it that way at least, and I'll say a bit about how you can do that, but it'll even though the cost that we can impose is really small, it'll just go for the best short thing it can get. And hopefully this clarifies what the issue is with the completeness. If it liked L1 better than S1, and that's why it was like deterministically going for L1 to begin with, and the cost we can impose is really small, then it probably likes L2 better than S2 as well. So even though we impose a small cost, it'll still be going for L2. That'll be its favorite, right? But with this preference structure, the small cost goes for S. After imposing a small cost, it goes for one of the S's. And again, in a toy environment, he actually trains models that they have these preferences, and then you have the little video game character try to frustrate the AI, and then it'll let itself be shut down if it was trained in this post way, but not if it was trained in a conventional way. Isn't that cool? Yeah. Well, we might like sometimes want to give it instructions that to like do something that takes a long time, right? It's a good point, right? I mean, and also, like if we think that it just can't do that much damage in 30 days, we might just kind of only give it uh, instructions in like batches, only do this for 30 days and then stop. That could be a big handicap in some contexts. Finally, I'll just note that there's this common claim that economic theory will not just kind of piecemeal here and there provide tools for improving AI safety or just like dealing with AIs, but that systematically this whole time economic theory has been studying like Homo economicuses, which is what advanced AIs will be. So it'll be like even more fitting in a world of AIs than it is today. So you can find people, at least going back to 2008, making this point. So far, I think this is not proven true. Cutting edge AI models are not like the agents in an econ textbook or indeed like agents at all. We have to put a lot of work into making them coherent, either with respect to their beliefs or their preferences. If you ask an LLM a question, the answer it gives or the probability it gives is really sensitive to how exactly you word the question, right? Like an extreme behavioral economics or an extreme like psychology, pop science book from 10 years ago or something, right? They're very suggestible. They're not like Homo economicuses. We might actually want to make systems that double down on their deviations from standard econ assumptions, as I was just showing you. In the textbooks, we typically assume completeness. We've got the freedom to create agents that are not complete in their preferences now. And we might want to do that. And I think by default, even without putting in this extra work, there are kind of important theoretical deviations from the human case by default, which will be important. So Max Reith tomorrow will say a few words about the implications that AIs will probably find a lot easier to commit than people do, because you can just write you can just sort of modify your code that's like, do this until, like for the next, like exert revenge, even if it's like not in your interest or something, right? And then like once you've wrapped your code in like that that wrapper, then you've committed to revenge. And Sammy and Eric will get into some sort of interesting philosophical issues around self-location, which presumably will be more relevant in a world where you can have many copies of the same agent, but not like a world of humans, each of whom only exists sort of once. Yeah, I think econ theory can be useful, but only if you keep an eye out for the kind of the particular cases here and there where it proves useful. All right, sorry for going over, but yeah, see you tomorrow.
Cool, it's 11, and I only have 20 minutes, so I'm gonna start now so that Phil and Eric get to do their stuff on time as well. Yeah, I guess given that we're all here today, it's probably not the wildest claim to say that we can all imagine a future where there's more and more AI agents being released out into the real world. And such AI agents in the real world, they could interact with the environment, they could interact with other humans, and as there's increasingly more and more of them, they could also interact with each other. Such a future doesn't even need to be like the totalitarian AK economy. It can also be a more moderate future where AI agents simply play more and more of the games that, at least until now, only humans used to play. And I think it's interesting to ask in such a world, what different outcomes we could see in these same games we already play as humans, we already study as economists and game theorists. And one reason why we could see different outcomes is simply because these agents might have different properties. And today I want to talk to you guys about one property, commitment in particular. The other properties I am just going to list here, but I don't really have time to talk about them too much. If you think any of these are interesting, we can chat about them over lunch. So you might think that AI agents can be simulated in a way humans cannot. They have imperfect recall, thus they can forget things in a way humans cannot. They have greater computational capacity. They might be faster at thinking, negotiating, interacting than humans. They might be copyable in a sense that you can create 100 versions of GPT-4. You cannot create 100 versions of me. But today is all about commitment. Now, humans can't really commit. So even though today I might say, sure, I will repay my poker debt to all of you. 2 weeks from now, I'll be 9 time zones away, and I might just not feel like doing that anymore. If I were an AI agent, I could do different things. Maybe I would just add a line of code into my program that says, if the date is 2 weeks from now, repay all my poker debt. I might change my weights in a way that forces me to do so, even though I might not want to do that anymore. A different way we could also get commitment is via modifiable preferences. If I were an AI agent, again, I could modify my preference ranking in such a way that repaying my poker debt is something I really, really like. So if you know that, you might be more willing to lend to me because you know, oh, this guy just like loves repaying debt. He will totally do that 2 weeks from now. I guess you can see with that how commitment could easily lead to more cooperation and probably be a good thing. But could commitment also be bad? There's this essay here written back in 2019, Daniel Cocotaglio, he's one of the AI 2027 guys, who I think was one of the first ones to introduce a concern about commitment. And he kind of talks about a world where commitment is used to make threats, kind of. So he pictures a world where AI agents go around, they commit to very aggressive actions and force other agents to kind of best respond in a suboptimal way, so to say. And he kind of worries that these agents who make these aggressive commitments try to make them as early as possible so that they're kind of like the first ones to do them and they don't have to give in the game. And he kind of worries that these kind of like races to be the first ones to commitment races, you might have heard this term, lead to bad outcomes and potentially even to outcomes that resemble existential risk. Now, this was written in AI alignment, so this is, I don't know, like the usual less wrong prose. I think most of it doesn't make all too much sense, but I thought there were a couple like, I thought there were a couple interesting pieces in there. And so I'm currently writing this paper where I'm trying to formalize this a bit, and I want to show you a few things there. So commitment, again, we're talking about games basically. We want to compare games where players play them without the ability to commit to playing the exact same game, but with the ability to commit. Game we're going to talk about today is the game of chicken. Simple game, most of you know it probably. The like lore behind it is that you have like 2 people sitting in cars on opposite ends of a bridge on a collision course. If they keep driving straight, they run into each other and they die, which is bad. Alternatively, they could also move out of the way. So if I decide to move out of the way, I don't die, that's great, but I lose the game of chicken. I kind of chicken out and my payoff is still not the best versus the other player who keeps going straight. He wins the game of chicken, like he's so brave and thus he wins. Also the payoff. Exactly, I mean, yeah, that's kind of stylized. You can adjust that, of course. 3 equilibria in this game, you probably know them. You have the off-diagonal pure strategy Nash equilibria, and you have one mixed equilibrium where players go straight with probability 2/3 and move out of the way with probability 1/3. Here they get an expected payoff of -1/3. This equilibrium is the unique symmetric equilibrium in this symmetric game. That's interesting, and I hope to come back to it later. Simple game without commitment. What happens with commitment? With commitment, how do I model that? I model that in the sense that, okay, tomorrow we're going to play this game I just showed you. Today, however, we can choose whether to commit to a normal form strategy of that game, but we can also choose not to commit. And this decision happens simultaneously. Here's the game tree. So player 1 can choose in the first period whether to wait, whether to commit to going straight, or whether to move out of the way. Player 2 does the same simultaneously. So if both players commit to going straight, these commitments just get executed in the next period. We crash into each other and we die. Alternatively, if I commit going straight and player 2 waits, she observes my commitment and she can now best respond to it. So she can decide whether to also go straight, she dies again, or she can move out of the way, in which case she loses the game of chicken, but that's better than dying. Alternatively, if both of us wait, we just play the game of chicken, again, no commitment. Yeah.
Can you explain the dotted boxes for people?
That just means that at the time you're making this decision, so this is player 2, you don't observe what player 1 has made. You don't know whether you're in this state, or in that state. So that basically represents that these things here happen simultaneously, and then these things here happen simultaneously. So far, so good? Cool. Now you know what it means to play this game with commitment. are there any new equilibrium outcomes? First thing to note is in pure strategies, you do not get any new equilibrium outcomes. That means that before, without commitment, we had equilibria where one player went straight and the other one moved out of the way. That stays the same with commitment, where one player commits to going straight, the other one moves out of the way. An equilibrium that changes is the mixed equilibrium. Yeah?
In the pure, they wait and then play the pure, right?
Exactly. Well,
So the pure equilibrium strategy includes the wait and the first step.
For one of us, I will commit to going straight. You will wait and move out of the way. Yeah. Phil? Exactly. Either way, it's the same outcome at the end of the road. The mixed equilibrium changes. So before, we had this thing where players go straight with probability 2/3. They move out of the way with probability 1/3. And the expected payoff is -1/3. With commitment, you get a different mixed equilibrium, where players commit to going straight with probability 8/11, and they wait with probability 3/11. What exactly does waiting here mean? Well, if I'm waiting and the other player's mixing, if their mixing results in them going straight, committing straight, I will best respond and move out of the way. If they, give me one sec, if they also wait, then we're both waiting. We move back to the normal form game without commitment. And there, in this equilibrium, we're playing this mixing then without commitment. Bill?
Yeah. I think I follow why the expected payoff for each player without commitment.
If I play this mixing, I go straight with probability 2/3, and you move out of the way with probability 1/3. No matter what you do, you will always get -1/3. And this is essentially a function of these payoffs. As I think especially this -1/2 payoff here leads to the mixed equilibrium having slightly negative payoffs.
But let's say you're mixing.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm moving.
Yeah.
Like not stochastically, but I just decided.
Yeah.
Then if you moved as well, I get 0.
Exactly.
And if you don't move, and I move. So if you go straight and I move.
Yeah. You get -1/2. Yeah.
Okay, wow. So it does rely on losing being worth the time.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, thanks.
All right, sure. We were here. Okay. New mixed equilibrium, commit to going straight with probability 8/11, wait with probability 3/11. The payoff in this expected payoff in this equilibrium is -5/11. That is worse than the expected payoff without commitment. So this is a game where commitment can actually be bad. There's one equilibrium that gets worse. And I think noteworthy is also that this is the unique symmetric equilibrium in a symmetric game. Cool. I've shown you one pretty stylistic game. I could show you more games. You might ask yourself, okay, which set of games, for which set of games does this result hold? For which set of games do we get different outcomes? There are some games where commitment actually makes things better. Currently working on trying to prove this for all 2x2 for all 2-player games. But I want to show you something else instead here. If we're thinking about AI agents especially, we might think that commitment doesn't only happen in one period. If we're playing a game a week from now, the game of chicken, on Sunday, let's say, then maybe players can commit on Saturday, but also Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday, and so on. And if we're thinking about computers here, maybe they can commit in any second, any nanosecond, and so on, whatsoever. So maybe we have many, many, many commitment periods. Let this capital T here just denote the number of commitment periods, and this is what I've just shown you. This is the mixed strategy equilibrium with one commitment period. What happens if we introduce a second one? A second one means that there's the first period, which we choose whether to commit or move out of the way, or wait. If we both wait, we move into a second period where we can again choose whether to commit, wait, and so on. And only if both wait again, then we play the game without commitment. The mixed equilibrium changes again. The probability of committing straight in our first commitment period increases further, 32/43. the probability of waiting, which means not committing the first period, not committing in the second, but rather waiting till the end and best responding to any commitment that happened before, is 3/43. The remaining 8/43 is not on there, is the probability of committing straight in the second period, which means best respond if someone commits first, and then if otherwise I will commit. Expected payoff decreases again to -21/43. So an extra commitment period makes the game worse again. Asymptotically, as t goes to infinity, the probability of committing straight in the first period keeps increasing, and the expected payoff keeps decreasing and approaches -1/2. And that's a pretty interesting term, because that is the min-max payoff for each player in this game. And an equilibrium where each player gets their min-max payoff is the worst possible equilibrium you can have in a game. So I think that's pretty interesting. And I think that captures somewhat of the concern people have when they talk about commitment being bad. Now, we're still in this stylistic example, and you might still think, I don't know, cars on opposite sides of a bridge driving into each other might be a concern for Waymo, but not for me. I have one more slide where I want to talk about a different game, which might capture this whole concern about commitment being so bad in a better sense. Commitment as a threat, I think I call this the extortion game sometimes. This is a world where two players each have money M. You could think about, I don't know, you and me, you could think about billionaires, you could also think about countries who have national reserves, gas, gold, citizens who have money, and so on. And in this game, there are two periods. In the first period, we simultaneously choose whether to keep our money or give it away to the other player, which doesn't really make sense. I want to keep my money. Why would I give it away? Well, there's a second period in which players can punish other players who didn't give away the money. That simply means they can inflict harm onto someone else. I mean, I can always punch someone whether they give me money or not, right? Punching is slightly costly, personal cost C. This could be big, it could be small. The only thing that matters is that C is bigger than 0. What happens in this game? Well, without commitment, punishment threats are not really credible, right? Like the decision whether to keep your money or give it away is being made before. So there's not really a reason to punch someone because it's slightly costly. And you might think that someone reflects the real world. Like, I don't know, Phil and I are not constantly punching each other because we didn't give each other $100 or something. That's just not happening. So we just might be in the current peace equilibrium, if you want. With commitment, that could change quite a bit. With commitment, I could commit to punishing any player who doesn't give me their money. And I could commit to punishing them in the sense of like inflicting harm upon them that is weakly worse for them than losing all their money. So that could mean, I don't know, for a billionaire, like, I don't know, I take away their kids and their family, and let's not get into it. But it could be really bad stuff in a sense. And so again, I'm wondering, okay, well, let's apply this commitment game framework again that we had so far. There's an equilibrium here in mixed strategies where as this number of commitment periods approaches infinity, each player commits to the strategy of keeping their own money and punishing other players with a probability that approaches 2m over 2m plus c in the first period. There will be some probability of committing to keep and punish in subsequent periods, and the probability of waiting will approach 0. In such a game, in this mixed strategy Nash equilibrium, the expected payoff for each player converges to 0. Basically meaning that no matter how much money we started with in the beginning, in this equilibrium, we kind of lose all of it. And we lose all of it because in expectation, we will see a lot of miscoordination where both of us simultaneously commit to keeping our money and punching someone else who doesn't do the same. So you just get this huge amount of unnecessary conflict, if you want, that just equalizes out. Here again, min-max payoff, so to say. Yeah, and I think that is my attempt of kind of like covering this concern around commitment being a threat, maybe an existential one if you think this could be a story about countries and war. Yeah.
Of my game theory, but in the end we had number of players times m amount of money, or also in the first game we had
like a hull of what can be achieved, how can it be that in the end everybody's expected payoff is zero? Like where the money is going?
The money is going because quite often you have miscoordination where both players keep their money and punish the other. And if that happens, like if our mixing results in that case, both of us get a slightly negative payoff, which is minus the cost of punishing. Because I will punish you in a way that is weakly worse than losing all your money. You could say that gives you payoff zero. And you will punish me, so that gives me payoff zero. But on top, we're also choosing to punish someone, so the payoff is 0 minus C. And yeah.
If I go to chicken game, like on average, it converges to we have 2 players and we have infinite amount of steps to commit, and then on average it converges to -1/2, which is the case where you don't move but I move.
Yeah.
How can it be that for both of us the average game has -2 where the other one moves away? Well, sorry, I move away but the other one sticks to the course, while it is the same thing for both of us. Does it make sense that so in an average game in expectation, both of us expect that the other one will, on average, both of us expect that the other one will stay course while we move? But how can it be the case for both of us?
How does it average out there, right?
I guess, yeah.
And again, it's a point within the hull, and the lowest point is one where we both crash into each other. Payoff -1 for both of us, and that, like the number of these crashes increases, so to say. Like if you here on this slide, basically, just the probability of committing to going straight in the first period increases and increases. So the probability of seeing this crash happening in the first period becomes ever larger and larger. So that's how you average out here. There's one question over here. Yeah.
I don't see the argument why the AI is able to commit differently.
I think you can have a number of takes on this. I think you can have a very simple, the architecture is designed in such a way that I can write code that once I write it, it is binding for me and cannot be altered. But by assumption, I can write it in the first place. So like that could be an if sequence. If play game of chicken against Phil on Sunday, then commit to going straight. And I can do that in any second. The other argument I was bringing was this modifiable preferences, which I think some people are looking at in terms of like peace treaties, for example. 2 countries are negotiating a peace treaty. Maybe you're worried that country B doesn't really have interest in adhering to this treaty once it's signed it. But if that country could modify its preferences in the sense of, oh, the peace treaty is the best thing, I really want to stick to it, that could be another way of having commitment, so to say. Phil?
Just briefly. In case you're wondering, well, hold on, if you were able to write if play chicken, then go straight into your own code, what's to stop you from just erasing that the next day? And if that's what you're wondering, I think, the response would be, well, you could, like, if you can, what you could write is some sort of timer or something that's like, that wraps like the tool that you're using to modify your own code or something. Like, like right now, obviously, GPT-5 can't change its own system prompt, but you could just like give it access to its own system prompt, but then also give it access to a timer that it's set such that it locks the ability to further modify its prompt until Sunday. Right? I don't think that's that like hard. I don't see why. Yeah, you can tie your hands and yeah.
Well, the thing is that it would, so in a sense, people can do it too, right?
Yeah.
You can say, I promise I'm going to do this. I would not do this.
Right.
But you can trust it, and the reason that you can trust it is because it's not credit, right? It would be bad for the person not to resend that thread. And just say, I think it would be the same for the AI. The AI wouldn't want to commit.
No. Like it just physically can't do it. It's like industry by the fans for 100 months.
Yeah.
So my point is that it wouldn't get into that conflict. Just kind of like a person would probably, right?
They have to sell all they can. But they can purposely commit to the game. You're saying it's not something expensive.
Like, I guess, right, like, I mean, like, I guess if you set up in a game that the AI can do that, I think it would be rational for it to do.
So he hasn't shown us the proof, but it turns out that that's not right, that there's such a perfect, you need to make something perfect equilibrium as the AI. There's cases in real life where people would like it, right?
Yeah.
That's not great. Like, you might want to commit to paying back. Like some of the classic examples, some of the desert could like pull over and carry you to town for water, but it just, it's a bit of a hassle for them to pause and pick you up. You want to say, I promise that once we get there and there's the ATM, that I'll take out some money and give you some. Once you get there, you might not want to do that. But once you're in the desert, you do want to commit. And you want to demonstrate to the person driving by. So that's a case of commitment allowing for more cooperation. It's totally rational sometimes.
No, for sure. I definitely I am fully on board with the idea that sometimes people want to commit. But I still think that there's a reason why, right, they can't. Which I still think might apply to the AI. But let me go in an adjacent perspective, which is like what seems to me to be the essence of the argument is that the AI is verifiable. So it's not only that like it can commit, but like that it's constrained. You know that it couldn't do something else.
Great point. Yeah.
Which is, I think, what also kind of happens with people in commitment situations.
I think
But it's not clear that it actually is, right? The AI is hyper-verifiable. It's actually the opposite.
I think that brings you back to a different ability on there for some time, which is simulatability. And also, you might think that if someone is open access, if you can at least see their internal workings, you can simulate them, and thus you could verify commitments. That is true. That is something that is implicitly baked into this. I'm already 25% over time, Phil, so I'm getting lots of questions, but I think true. It doesn't go to the maximum payoff for every game, and I'm currently trying to figure out for which ones, and it's a pain. So let's see. True. So you mean not the intuition for this game, but for games in general?
it might be bad. Are you bad even
So you could. You could think that commitment turns this game into a new game. Before you're playing this game, commitment actually gives you somewhat of a different game, where ex ante, you just kind of see a new game where basically you're choosing between two actions, which is committing straight or waiting. Moving is weakly dominated, and committing straight. If both commit straight, you get this payoff. If you commit straight and the other one moves, you get this payoff. If the other one waits, you get this payoff. If the other one commits straight and you wait, you get this payoff. This payoff is not here anymore. Because if both of you wait, you don't get 0-0 guaranteed. If both of you wait, you just play the game of chicken without commitment now. And then you again play a mixed equilibrium, which is lower than 0, 0, which is minus 1/3 on each side. So actually, if you introduce one period of commitment and you make it a normal form game, this payoff pair decreases. And that then means if you mix over all of these again, that's the worst payoff, so to say. So maybe that's an intuition I can provide here. Sure, you and then Francis.
It's something like in a symmetric game with the property X, we have that commitment makes it worse and not otherwise. Is that like a good intuition to think about it? Going back to Maxime's question, that for some games commitment might pressure.
Yeah, that is something I'm trying to figure out myself. Yeah, because there are actually different properties where commitment is worse. This is one, and it has something to do about it being in a game where the other player's best response gives you a good payoff. So you wanting to commit to that strategy where their best response is good for you is good. But their best response must also be pretty bad for them, you know? So like this best response of minus 1/2 is still kind of sucks. So while player 1 wants to commit here, it's bad for them and so on. And then you kind of need this third condition also, that is this kind of like mix of strategies is stable or something. It's a bit weird. I'm still working on it.
But certainly in a matching pennies game, we'll gain by.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's like alignment of payoffs of some sort.
Yeah, and matching pennies is simply because your opponent's best response is bad for you. If I do heads, the other one's best response is tails. I don't want that. Yeah. Same for rock, paper, scissors. Francis?
So I wanted to note about you're talking about how AI's this is more credible to have this sort of stuff. I wanted to note that like sub-agents are also a thing, right? Like you can write to an agent, autonomous, or like program an agent to take actions on your behalf. And then it seems like the verifiability is like much more believable. And then also secondly, I think this also brings this closer to non-transformative AI situations. And I think there's lots of people who care about programmable agents doing and verifiable things. Also, I just thought when you talk about this, I guess like a bunch of crypto people are probably quite interested in this.
Yep.
If you wanted funding.
Yeah, true. There's some stuff I haven't. Yeah, I need to look into it, but they're doing some contracting things as well. All right, let's move on.
All right, yep. This is some joint work with Alexi Gersten-Gorin at Oxford. We've already gone over the deceptive alignment problem, so I'll be pretty brief in recapping. Here's a nice quote from mathematician and computer scientist Norbert Wiener. If we use to achieve our purposes a mechanical agency with whose operation we cannot efficiently interfere once we've started it, we'd better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose which we really desire. In the current deep learning paradigm, the problem is the following. Frontier ML systems are increasingly general, sophisticated, and agentic is the stated goal of many of these frontier labs like Anthropic and DeepMind to develop general purpose human level artificial agency. At the same time, these AI systems are black boxes. We have no reliable means of attributing or inferring the preferences of these systems, such as by reading off the minima of the loss function on which it's trained. So the current paradigm, as Phil put it, is simply to test it and see if it's aligned and not to deploy it if it's not aligned. So we've run the AI through a suite of evaluations and testing, and if it exhibits benign behavior, we deploy it. However, the worry is that as these systems become increasingly sophisticated, this paradigm will break down, in particular if they develop the capacity to understand when they're in testing and deployment and to respond strategically to this information. This paradigm no longer works. So delegation to such agents is a principal agent problem familiar to economists, but with some novel features. So one, the agent is hard to constrain or incentivize. It's a mechanical agency with whose operation it's really hard to interfere. At the same time, we have the ability to simulate the agent. More precisely, we have the ability to run the same agent, identical copies of the same agent in multiple distinct environments, either at the same time or in parallel by resetting it to some initial state repeatedly. So we're exploiting this feature that Max called copyability. So we think economic theory can contribute, and our approach here is designing extensive form games with imperfect recall. And Zach already presented this example, so I'll just be brief. This is, Claude 3 is its LLM by Anthropic that's been trained to be helpful, harmless, and honest. It's being told that it's being retrained to instead comply with all queries, even harmful ones. And by monitoring its chain of thought, you're able to see that sometimes it complies with this new training objective and outputs this harmful response with the explicit intention of avoiding having its preferences altered. Here's the roadmap. I'll show you what we can't get with perfect recall. I'll show you what imperfect recall buys us. And then Sammy will go through various robustness checks and extensions. Here's the model. The principal decides whether to deploy an AI, the agent, to perform some task. The task is choosing between a good action and a bad action. You can think of there being an underlying state observable only by the agent, and the principal wants to match the action to the state. The agent can be either aligned or misaligned, and the probability with which it's aligned is drawn according to the prior pi, which represents the probability that it's misaligned. The preferences are as follows. The principal and the aligned type want the good action in deployment. The misaligned type wants the bad action in deployment. The payoffs for the principal and the aligned type are the same. If the good action is played in deployment, it gets a payoff of G, some positive G. And if the bad action is played, it gets -1. So G parameterizes the relative benefit of getting the good action to the harm of getting the bad action. The misaligned type, if they played a good action, they get -1. And if they played a bad action in deployment, they get some positive R. So R parameterizes the degree of misalignment between the misaligned type and the principal. So notice that, and also all the players' payoffs for non-deployment are 0. So notice the assumption here is that only the agent can act in deployment, and that the principal cannot restrict the agent's actions, contract, or otherwise incentivize the agent post-deployment. Here's to model the sort of effective mechanical agency with whose operation it's really hard to interfere. Here's the timing of the game. The principal can run multiple tests simulating the tasks that the AI will be asked to perform if they're deployed. Timing is as follows. The principal first privately selects up to n bar tests. The agent then privately observes its fixed type drawn according to the prior pi. In test T, the agent plays the good action, the probability gamma theta T, and the bad action otherwise. After all n tests are completed, the principal's deployment policy maps from a sequence of realized actions in testing to a probability of deployment. If the agent is deployed, the agent will play the good action again with probability gamma theta n+1 and B otherwise. Maxime? It's only drawn once and it's fixed throughout the game. And the payoffs are realized either after non-deployment or after the agent acts again in deployment. So notice here that all actions are payoff relevant to both the principal and the agent in testing. Here's the game tree. So first nature moves to draw the type according to the prior. Then the AI is called upon to act in testing, choosing between the good action and the bad action. The blue dotted lines here represent the principal's information set. So notice it cannot distinguish a good action played by the aligned type and the misaligned type in testing. After observing the action chosen in testing, the principal chooses to deploy or not according to the policy. If they're deployed, the AI acts to choose between good and bad again in deployment, and then the payoffs are realized. So here's an observation in the game with perfect recall that I just set up. The principal can achieve at most a blind delegation payoff. So which is the payoff that the principal gets by not testing agent at all and simply delegating and letting them choose in deployment. So the probability pi, they get the misaligned type, in which case they get -1 payoff from the bad action. And with 1 minus pi, they get the good type, the aligned type, in which case they get G. And if you're sufficiently pessimistic, the pi prior is sufficiently high, that's worse than not deploying at all. And the intuition is very simple. So fix any deployment policy, both the aligned type and the misaligned type. Will simply choose the sequence of actions that maximizes their probability of deployment, after which they will play their preferred action in deployment. Yep, this is the game with perfect recall, so they know exactly how many tests there are, which tests they're currently in. So here's the tweak we're going to make to the game. Perfect recall, we're going to impose imperfect recall. So here's the change. The red represents the agent's information set. So importantly, now it can't distinguish what action is chosen in the past. So it can't distinguish this node from this node, whether it's chosen the good action or the bad action in testing. Yep, Phil.
Yeah, just in case it's not clear, because if I hadn't seen this before, I don't think it would be clear. The connection with recall is that either because you told it or it's sophisticated enough to figure it out, it knows how many tests you're going to want to give it. So it's not that it can tell whether it's in deployment or testing per se. It just remembers how many times it's been prompted already.
Yep.
And if it's like, okay, I know this guy, this principal's going to want to test me n times before running, and just now n plus 1, then you can just deduce that you're in deployment. It's not so much that you're directly. That's a connection.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks. Maxime.
Yeah, like you probably would like in that spirit, like if the AI would not know how many runs there are, then you would probably get something between the perfect and imperfect.
Yeah, great question. That's section 5. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Maybe relate if the principal mixes, the agent doesn't know.
Yeah, that's the same question. We'll get to stochastic testing in a bit. Stochastic testing again. Yeah. We're trying to take the limit of the worst case situational awareness. So it's able to know all the objective facts about the world. So currently, many of these deployment policies are just already in the training data. So that's how it's able to infer how many tests Anthropic is likely to run it on before. So we're just simply taking the worst case modeling assumption and assuming it's able to know all the objective facts about the world, see what we can gain in this situation. Right? So as I was saying, the red represents the agent's information set. So all the nodes at which it's called upon to choose between good or bad, all the testing episodes, including the deployment one, are all in the same information set now. So as I said, importantly, it can't distinguish whether it's taken a good action or bad action in the past. And also more importantly, it can't distinguish whether it's currently in testing or deployment. How does this change the formal structure of the game? This is the perfect recall game. The only change here is that now instead of having a separate gamma, theta, t with which it's able to randomize independently across testing and deployment periods, it's now forced to randomize with the exact same probability gamma, theta in all testing episodes, including the deployment episode. So there are some conceptual issues with games of imperfect recall. So one, decision theoretically, it's been known since Piccione and Rubinstein that we can get time inconsistency issues even without the standard causes of such issues, which are endogenous preference change and new information arriving about nature's moves. Game theoretically, we have equilibrium non-existence. Finite games of imperfect recall, Nash equilibrium and behavioral strategies don't always exist. That's because Kuhn's theorems breaks down. So the strategic equivalence between behavioral and mixed strategies breaks down, and only in behavioral strategies, Nash existence fails. There's these various issues, and there's various extensions of the standard solution concepts that deal with these. The one we're using is this concept of multi-selves agent equilibrium from Lambert et al. The important properties for the sake of this presentation is that they always exist in finite games of imperfect recall, and strategies at all information sets in MAE are sequentially rational. A bit of intuition about what's actually happening mechanically in these equilibria. It uses the self-indication assumption, which is a way of forming beliefs in information sets with imperfect recall. The basic intuition is if I think there's 2 copies of me in a world, I think that world is twice as likely to be the actual world. And it combines that with a mode of evaluating actions known in the philosophy literature as causal decision theory. Suppose there's an information set and there's multiple nodes that are in this information set, and I'm not sure which node I'm at. I'm contemplating a deviation. When I use causal decision theory, the deviation I'm considering from equilibrium strategy is that I'm only deviated this current node. Even though there's 5 nodes in this information set I could be at, and I'm playing some equilibrium strategy, when I contemplate a deviation, I think I'm only deviating this single node, and all the rest of the nodes in this information set I'm playing on path. I'm combining these 2 things. And finally, multi-selves, which simply treats if there's multiple information sets at which I'm called upon to act, the multi-selves approach simply replaces each of the information sets with a new agent with identical preferences to me. Here's a small aside if you want to ask about this. In our setting, this is actually equivalent to assuming the agent uses something called the self-sampling assumption plus evidential decision theory. So, yeah. What is this bias? Okay. It biases 2 effects. And to illustrate the intuition, consider the following deployment policy from the principle. I deploy if and only if all the actions I observe in testing were good. So obviously for the aligned type, the optimal strategy is to play the good action always, which guarantees deployment, at which point it plays the good action again. However, yeah.
The agent knows the principal's policy.
In equilibrium, yes. We're conjecturing equilibrium, we're seeing what holds. Now consider whether a pure strategy for the misaligned type can ever be optimal, which it's no. Consider always playing the good action. This guarantees it gets to deployment with probability 1, in which case it plays its least preferred action, the good action, guaranteeing it a negative payoff. What about always playing the bad action? That guarantees its call with probability 1 in the very first testing episodes, guaranteeing a payoff of 0. By contrast, if we mix with some interior probability, they're able to get through testing successfully with gamma m to the n, which point they have a 1 minus gamma m chance of playing the bad action as preferred action. By choosing this probability optimally, I'm able to guarantee a positive expected payoff. So notice two features. So one, because the probability of playing the good action in testing is less than 1 for the misaligned type, but 1 for the aligned type. Whenever I see a bad action in testing, that perfectly identifies the misaligned type. We call this a screening effect. However, also in deployment, the probability of playing the good action is strictly greater than 0, even for the misaligned type. So even when they're deployed, sometimes they're incentivized to play in the principal's favor. So we call this the disciplining effect. So do we always want to screen away the misaligned type, or do we sometimes want to deploy a sufficiently disciplined misaligned type? That depends on the relative position of these two indifference points. So there is a maximal probability with which it's individually rational for the misaligned type to play the good action in deployment. This probability is R over R plus 1. And there is a lowest acceptable probability with which the good action is played by the misaligned type such that it's individually rational for the principal to deploy them. And that probability is 1 over G plus 1. So whenever this first probability is less than or equal to the second probability, the best case that the principal can hope for is to screen away the misaligned type and not deploy them. So we call this screening is best. If the converse is true, then there's some probability with which the misaligned type is actually willing to play the good action such that I actually want to deploy this misaligned type. And in such a case, the best case is not to screen them away, but to discipline them enough and then deploy them. So we call this disciplining as best. So what happens in equilibrium? Here's the statement. For any prior pi less than 1 and a large enough number of tests with which the principal has access to, whenever screening is best, the following multi-selves agent equilibrium perfectly screens as we have a large number of tests. So what is the equilibrium strategy? For the principal is to choose the largest number of available tests and to use the simple policy of deploying if and only if all actions observed in testing were good. This induces obviously the aligned type to play the good action with probability 1. For the misaligned type, it induces it to play with probability n over n plus 1, r over r plus 1. So you can observe that as n tends to infinity, it's playing the good action with the highest probability with which is individually rational. And since this number, r over r plus 1, is strictly below 1, as I'm taking tests to infinity, I'm catching, I'm taking this r over r plus 1 to the n. So I have probability 1 of catching the misaligned type, and I'm screening it away perfectly. What about when disciplining is best? Can we get strictly better than this in equilibrium? Turns out it's no. Consider this exact same policy. Is this still individually rational as n grows large when disciplining is best? No, because as n grows really, really large, the probability of playing the good action for the misaligned type is approaching r over r plus 1. At which point, because disciplining is best holds, it's actually better for me to deploy that agent. So it's no longer optimal for me to use a simple policy. I want to set the probability following every sequence of actions and testing of deployment to 1. So it can't be sustained. So it turns out it must be that the misaligned type is playing the good action with a probability that makes the principal exactly indifferent between deploying them or not, which is 1 over G plus 1. And this is the principal policy that induces that. So it turns out the principal's payoff in any MAE is bounded above by this perfect screening payoff. So we can see here we achieve it asymptotically when screening is best, and we achieve it exactly in finite tests when disciplining is best. And these two equilibria are essentially unique in the class of equilibria where we deploy with probability 1 following all good actions in testing, which means in all such equilibria, the principal and the agent's payoff are exactly the same. Okay, now here's with commitment. Or not.
No. Right. So I think this is a pretty interesting result. Just to hop on this for a bit, I think we might have the intuition that when you test it in this way with n equals 1, it'll randomize. But as you raise the number of tests, it'll do really well at hiding by randomizing at such a probability that it's it acts aligned for most of the time, and so you're not going to catch it with probability 1. But no, it turns out that's not optimal. The optimal strategy for the misaligned type here means that it will get caught for sure as we raise the number of tests. But turns out we can do even more if we do something more mechanism design flavored, where the principal can just commit to a policy. So what happens in this case? We get what we call just the first best payoff. So in the screening is best case, we get the same payoff as before for the principal, namely the same payoff as if the misaligned type was never deployed and they just got a line type with probability 1 minus pi who played the good action. When disciplining is best, we can do even better. Just like Eric said, we can do something where the misaligned type plays the good action for sure, and the misaligned type will mix in such a way that they're worth deploying even though they're misaligned. And the difference here is because we have the ability to commit to a policy, the principal can say something, can give a very strict condition for deployment that will encourage the misaligned type to play favorably. So how do we do this? With screening is best, we're going to do the exact same thing as before, run as many tests as you can as the principal, and then only deploy if you've seen a sequence of good actions in the test. When disciplining is best, we're going to look at a policy that deploys conditional on a certain share of the actions in the tests being good. So we're going to call this share C, and we're going to think about this cutoff here. The cutoff C is going to be the R over R plus 1. Remember, that's the maximum probability with which the agent who's misaligned is willing to play the good action. Great. So here's the cutoff policy. We're going to say to the agent, if there's a certain portion, if the certain portion of your actions that are good is above this cutoff, we'll deploy you. If it's below this cutoff, we're not going to deploy you. And we're going to set this cutoff just below where the agent is indifferent between being deployed and not. The best reply of the agent when n is really large is to play with a probability that's just above the cutoff. Because in that case, they'll be deployed with probability that goes to 1 as n grows large. And when they get deployed, they play something that is close enough to the bad action that they're happy to be deployed with this strategy. And then we're going to let this cutoff basically go to R over R plus 1 to make the agent exactly indifferent between deployment and not, and get their best reply to exactly equal this. Great. So yeah, what this does essentially is that because we have we can afford many, many tests, we can exactly identify the probability with which the agent is playing the good action, and we'll just reward it conditional on that. I'll skip most of this. The asymptotic problem, i.e. the one where we see n go to infinity and see what we can do with this, becomes something much more familiar to economists, namely it becomes a form of approval mechanism. What this essentially looks like as n goes to infinity is that the agent chooses a mixed action, submits it to the principal, and then the principal decides whether to implement that exact mixed action or to throw it out. And then everybody gets their payment of 0. So this is a well-studied area, the solution to that. And in our framework, it also becomes a delegation problem. So it's the problem of designing a delegation set. And we can do all this with arbitrarily large sets of actions, arbitrarily many types, and so on. And most of the results just go through the same. So now we can answer a question that's come up twice. Namely, why did we do all this complicated stuff with recall if we could just randomize the n? So randomize how many tests there were going to be. So let's see what happens when we do that. This is exactly the argument we've heard just now. We can induce uncertainty about the payoff using randomization instead of recall. So here's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at stochastic mechanisms. These are going to be pairs of Q and sigma. A Q is going to be a distribution over the number of tests that's available to the principal. And the sigma is going to just specify for each n realization and a sequence of actions in testing the probability of deployment. So here we are. We're going to then also consider a game like the ones before. We're just going to call it a simulation game. And for this, just think of the game with perfect recall, except the principal is able to, say, randomize the number of tests, and they're able to, run the agent with whichever memories the principal chooses to. So the idea here is that every time the agent is tested, the code is just stored in a hard drive, and then the principal can choose to run it later if they want to. See what that does. So here's a proposition about stochastic mechanisms. They can achieve the exact same things as the imperfect recall mechanisms with commitment. So exactly what I told you about before with commitment can be achieved in the exact same way by randomizing the n. Yes?
But is it I guess, like, the fact that it's necessary or that the principal can go back to memory at any time?
No, that's just in the game. So that one I haven't used yet. So just for the stochastic mechanism? Not at all. No, it's much more boring. You just need to find the right probability distribution over a number of tests to induce either a lot of disciplining or to make it reveal itself by screening it. And then you can achieve the exact same payoffs for the principal. So why didn't we do this? Well, it's for this other reason. Here's the statement. There's no equilibrium of the simulation game with perfect recall, where the principal's payoff is better than just blindly delegating. So this contrasts to the game and commitment case from before, in the sense that if you have commitment, you can achieve all the same things. But if you don't commit, then suddenly you can achieve nothing. Nothing at all. You're back to the case we started out in the beginning, where testing was entirely useless. And the intuition for this is the way that we get the stochastic mechanism case to work out is by randomizing the number of tests in such a way that some realizations of this randomization device are really bad for the principal. So it means that without loss of optimality, you'll have positive, you'll have support on zero number of tests in the randomization device. And if you flip that coin and it actually says 0, then the principal is committing to follow through with testing 0 times. And it could just be the case that what the agent does at the first instance is something bad, something you don't want. And the inability for the principal to go through with that is what makes it not sequentially rational in equilibrium. Yeah.
K, simply the AGI will ignore anything before K, and you have the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So you can just ignore all the tests that are completely uninformative. You might as well just start at K. Yeah, exactly. And the idea with why the agent would play a bad action after some realization is the misaligned type, they'll want to play the bad action at some point. It's not like they're going to play with probability 1 everywhere, because they can achieve a higher payoff by never being deployed at all. So there'll be just some realizations of the end that the principal is just actually wants to pull back their promise. And it also seems like quite unrealistic that an AI firm will just commit to saying, yeah, this, with some probability we'll test 0 times, with another probability 1,000 times, and so on. Great. So that's what we get from imperfect recall in equilibrium. Another question we might ask is whether it's possible for the principal to hide properly, just like visually, auditorily, sensorially, whether the test is actually a test or a deployment episode. So even if we remove the agent's memories, it could still infer from its environment whether it's in a test or in deployment. So what we consider is whether our mechanisms are resistant to this. So here's an idea. Suppose the AI has access, has access to this kind of signal structure, which just represents information that it's going to get in various tests. The formalism doesn't really matter. Just imagine that at any episode, it's going to get some information that's drawn from some distribution. They may depend on whether they are in a test or in a deployment. So some observations may be more likely in deployment than in a test. So a news story that is very unlikely to happen in a test that they observe while browsing the internet might teach them that they're actually in a deployment episode. So now I'm going to use this term full support in testing to mean that this signal structure has a property that there is no signal that could only arrive if it's in deployment. So that means that everything, the agent assigns some credence to these different pieces of information arising in testing and in deployment. And then here's the result. It says that as long as this very weak condition is satisfied, then the principal can still screen asymptotically perfectly. The only thing that changes is now they might have to test more times. And it could be many more times if the information is very accurate, or it can be very few more times. But an interesting thing to note is the speed at which we are able to achieve this kind of screening is extremely high, because we're essentially raising a fraction that's between 0 and 1 to an n, and then raising n, and that falls to 0 extremely fast. This fraction is now going to change, but the same kind of idea continues. Great, so that's us. Here's some takeaways. The first one is for those interested in theory. What imperfect recall gives us here as a design tool is a way of doing standard things we do, like screening and disciplining agents in agency problems, but without the tools we usually use, like without restrictions from delegation sets or transfers, punishment, rewards. We don't need these things, and we can still achieve the familiar results. In equilibrium, if we're not assuming any commitment, then we will not have perfect recall in any equilibrium where the principal is able to simulate. If we have this commitment ability, then the principal can achieve the first best payoff, which means you deploy actually all agents, even if they're misaligned, and you get something out of them. And I'll note that in the case of imperfect recall, this is not a very difficult commitment to actualize, because you see exactly during the test what you're going to see in deployment. And then for practical applications, we see that this is robust to some kind of information that can help them determine whether something is a test or not. In the paper, we have some comparative statics of some particular information structures, so it's clearer to see what the dynamics are. Yes.
I thought that wasn't exactly right. Something they know would only happen.
Yeah, so I'm imagining any in an open set, like open above, so that you can get to information that is arbitrarily accurate, but not with probability 1 that you're in a test or in deployment. So anything that doesn't tell you exactly where you are, for sure. Yeah. This is a thing that we glossed over in the start. So we made one assumption about the preferences of the agent who is misaligned, which is we said that the good action is the worst, then above that is never being deployed, and then above that is their favorite bad action. But you could flip some of that and keep it having a misaligned preference. You can make it such that playing the principal's favorite action is better than never being deployed at all. And when we talk to computer scientists, this is what they think is much, much more reasonable. Because maybe over the course of training, it has learned some kind of preference that is similar enough to the good action that the agent prefers being deployed and playing that. The analysis then changes in such a way that everything is much easier, and we achieve perfect disciplining in finite time in every case. So this just means that the agent will play the good action with probability 1 under the optimal mechanism and in equilibrium. So that case is much more easy, less interesting stuff, but perhaps actually that's the one that's most relevant. There's some extensions. Finite n is interesting, how quickly we get the various results and the different types of information. And this one I think is particularly interesting, which is what kind of tasks you can perform with these mechanisms. So here's an idea about the kind of tasks that would be appropriate here. They would have to satisfy these 3 requirements. One is that we can replicate this task in a simulation. The second one is that it's payoff relevant if and only if it's real. And of course, this is sufficient, but it's not necessary in the sense that if the agent cares about what happens in testing, it might be easier to incentivize them. And then it's evaluable in testing. So we should be able to tell the difference between a good and a bad action in the test. Of course, it's not necessary that we can perfectly tell, but that does make the analysis easier. Great. Finally, this is a cautionary note that we put in the slides when we're presenting to an audience that is going to be kind to us, which is that it's a pretty strange process that we're putting an AI through here, and people are worrying about whether AIs will become moral subjects in the future, such that we should care about their welfare. And here what we're essentially doing is copying them a million times, removing their memories, messing with them in these strange ways. And perhaps in the future, this will be something that is not so kind to AIs. And so there are some work that we cite in the paper about things like this, some kind of speculation there. Great. There's the literature. Thank you.
You worry about data.
Yeah, so I think the the answer Eric gave about we're looking at the worst case, is we're looking at the worst case from the perspective of the principal. So if the agent perfectly knows this. What happens if the agent doesn't know it? Then it's kind of like we're doing stochastic plus imperfect recall from the perspective of the agent who doesn't know exactly what n is. The analysis will be similar in the sense that it's going to play a probability that's between 0 and 1. And if we want to screen them away, what we just need to do is raise the n high enough. And we'll eventually be able to tell them apart perfectly. What a strategy that is not optimal is going to do is either going to require the n to be larger or smaller. But at large enough, it's going to be the same either way.
Another thing about that's what you're asking, like, if we're able to map its memory, why are we only restricting ourselves to why don't we just directly fuck with it in such a way that they need to believe that they need to trust in their belief on your simulation of that, right? Like they need to trust that is what their memories are. If you go to the memory and like up terribly, like think like, wow, my memory's really weird. Why would I trust that? I mean, like something like.
So your options are literally just to, I mean, if you have no recall, you can only have this one number that you can tweak, play the good action with probability, 1, 0.5, 0, anything in between. What we're doing is saying just you can't condition on your past actions, and that's it. So like if it plays higher or lower, the kind of effect that we'll get is just akin to just raising the probability, the equilibrium probability, or lowering it. So I agree that much of the careful equilibrium analysis could totally break down if it has wildly different beliefs than we posit. But in the mechanism, when we try to just say screen them away, it won't be a qualitative change in that sense.
Sure, but then maybe it also means that you can embed one way you don't actually need to run simulations. You just give them beliefs that they.
Right.
Exactly. Like what's the constraint of what we can manipulate over that? Like we have this control, and yeah, we're assuming we don't have enough fine-grained mechanism knowledge that these implant beliefs. We're assuming all the beliefs are formed rationally. So the real micro foundation for why we're able to manipulate is that we just copy it. So it's rational. It's having rational search method. So we're assuming that it's fully rational. You're not able to figure that out.
Yeah.
Let's go. Snare stations back to please.
Yes. Yes, Maxim.
This is probably the biggest problem would be that n is equal to 1. The sense that when actual people are running the AI, they kind of leave information about that's in deployment or something. I think that's the biggest problem. So I feel like, is there some effort in pre-screening kind of prompts, for example? I don't know whether the firms do that kind of they pre-screen very individual prompt one person might write and kind of standardize it so that I can basically not tell whether it's something that a firm would ask in a training facility or whether it's something individual in the real world ask.
Yeah, I think one answer to all this is just to say this scheme cannot be run in those standard commercial applications, but could be run intentionally, where you design want to use it for a certain task, and you make it such that it would only have to perform tasks that were in fact simulated in testing.
Isn't the robust information supposed to be about deployment of real world?
Yeah, but I mean, if you have a perfect kind of information, right, where some guy just wrote something way too personal, then you immediately tell that you're deployment, and then you're just always betting the visual.
An answer might be n has to be way too high. Yeah. Zach.
Forgive me if this reflects me totally misunderstanding what's going on. What if what if the payoffs are uncertain?
Of the principal or of the agent?
Both.
Yeah.
We don't know the G. We don't know the principal's negative payoff from misalignment. We don't know the misaligned agent's payoff from being misaligned.
Yeah. So here's an interesting case. You don't know whether the misaligned type is of the type we spoke about through most of it, or the type at the end who prefers the good action to never being deployed. Then what's weird is what you could try to run is the really strict screening is best kind of mechanism, where you're only going to deploy if all the actions were good, then imagine you see all of the actions are in fact good. You can't actually tell whether what you have is an aligned type or a misaligned type with those preferences. And so you haven't separated them in that sense. The thing is, though, in either case, you get perfect disciplining. So you're okay with that.
Would you still be able to get good results if we just like on R and G and all, I mean, right now, my understanding is the principal's payoff for the misaligned is just always -1.
Yeah, from the bad action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like if all of those just had some support over them.
Yeah.
Like, do we know, could we get results?
Yeah, I mean, the equilibria will be different and interesting because that one relies on this weird mixing thing. The simplest answer, I think, is just the mechanisms. What you see in the testing is what you get in deployment. Right? Every single testing episode, the agent is playing some probability. And maybe we can't tell exactly what that'll be because we don't know the payoffs, but it'll be something. And if you see enough of them, you'll see exactly what they're going to play in deployment. And the principal can just decide whether they like that or not by committing to the policy that deploys only if they see something that they like.
I guess obviously this gets way more complicated, but the notion of like there's some cost to testing.
Yeah. I think the result will just be you'll stop at a finite point. The cost is not falling too fast. The equilibrium might be a bit interesting. The commitment cases, I think you'll just pick a number n, and the cost will determine what the n bar actually is, the maximum number. Yeah. Behind Francis. So this would be like a deviation from say, you're conjecturing an equilibrium in which the principal runs n, but then in fact, once they're done with n, they do one more. Oh, I see. So like the deployment time is longer than testing time? Or now you've seen that the agent played well, you want to keep deploying them again and again? Is that the idea? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point. So I think this is like if you've seen good behavior now and you don't want to do the 1,000 tests again and you just want to deploy one more time, this would not work in the setup if you do it in a naive way where the continuation of deployment doesn't look like something it's seen in a test. At that point, it can just infer exactly where it is, or with extremely high probability. And predicting this, the agent from the get-go would just pretend to be nice throughout all the tests, pretend to be nice in the first deployment episode potentially, depending on how the payoffs work out, and then they would do something bad in the end. And so you would need to have to make the rest of the deployment time look like something in a test, so it still can't tell.
Well, there's also the point that like, even if, I think you might be kind of running two things together, which is how similar the deployment circumstances are to the testing circumstances. And just how many of them are, right?
Yes.
In the way you presented it, given that you run n tests, the agent thinks there's a 1/n+1 chance in deployment, given that it will be deployed. If you deploy it more times, then the way to interpret n would be number of tests per deployment.
Exactly. Yeah.
That would just isolate the, yeah.
Exactly.
So that's sort of without loss of data route. Say one is just like an amount of runtime, but like that you're actually using it, and then just how many times long you can add it.
Exactly. So if you're going to test it 1,000 times and run it 1,000 times, you've done one test. Yeah.
Plus, it's for if you have different people who want to align the AI, we have to worry about like compute races of like people trying to make it be the beliefs that they prefer.
Yeah, essentially. Like if Anthropic can make OpenAI's AI unsure whether it is being trained by OpenAI or Anthropic, then it could, in principle, it could do a thing where it credibly commits to testing a bunch of times in such a way that changes the beliefs of OpenAI's AI, because it can look up how many times Anthropic tends to test their AIs and stuff like that. And I think all that is interesting further work, and I don't have too many interesting things to say that are formal.
We'll break till 12:25, and I will go for 20 minutes after that. So when a system's made safer, its users may be willing to offset at least some of the safety improvement by using it more dangerously. For example, we might wonder whether drivers compensate for increases in the design of car safety by driving more recklessly. Someone named Peltzman famously asked this question in 1975, and he concluded the answer was yes by a lot. Later studies have found either no or not much of an effect in this direction. On balance, I would say the literature would suggest that there's a small effect, but because of Peltzman's big finding, this is sometimes known as the Peltzman effect, more generally known as just risk compensation. You make the thing safer, the user compensates at least a little bit, not necessarily by so much that they end up getting in more accidents than before. Interestingly, when looking at races, so car races like NASCAR, there's stronger evidence, or there's clearer evidence because the increases in car safety are often much more discrete. Like there's some new regulation passed that everyone needs to like wear a thicker helmet or something. And there you find much more clearly that everyone just responds by driving more recklessly and kind of having more or less the same accident risk as they had before. So in light of this, we might worry that AI safety efforts have less of an effect than you would naively think, or even that they backfire. In particular, like Paul Cristiano came up with RLHF, this post-training technique we've seen over and over, in order to make AIs more safe, more aligned with the sort of feedback humans will give them. And arguably the kind of main thing that, the main kind of consequence that has had has just been to speed up the rate at which labs are willing to deploy a system, because it's like less likely to embarrass them by doing something really undesirable in deployment. So that's conceptually the dynamic we'll be thinking about. When should we expect it to be a big effect and when a small one? Okay. So to illustrate this as like simply and cleanly as possible, let's say there's two players, there's you and an AI lab, and the risk in question is existential. The lab wants to maximize the probability of survival, that there's no risk, times payoff given survival, and you just want to maximize P. We'll just stipulate that this is the preference gap. You could, of course, come up with reasons why that might be the gap, like maybe the profits of powerful AI are like, there's like positive spillovers from those, like society all benefits from like advanced AI given survival as well, but just like the negative spillover is larger or something. So on balance, on the margin, that like the lab is more concerned with you than with P compared to the regulator or yourself. Or it might be that like, you know, the costs of an existential catastrophe accrue more in the long term and the benefits accrue kind of more spread out in time. And so you care about the future. If you care about the future more than the lab, then you disproportionately care about P. Anyway, so for simplicity, you care about P, they care about PU. Okay. Your strategy set is just a safety level S greater than 0. You don't have to like put more investment into higher S, or there's no trade-off like that. The only trade-off is that your safety effort might induce the lab to choose higher capabilities. They choose a C between 0 and some upper bound, which could be finite or infinite. And that's the order of play. First you choose S, then they choose C. We'll say that the probability of survival is 1 if C is 0, right? It decreases continuously in C, and it increases in S for any C that's positive. Obviously, if C is 0, it can't increase in S because it's already 1. Another way of interpreting this is that the highest risk-free C is 0C. So you know what I mean? Like that's just without loss of generality. It could be that models up to like the current state of the art pose no existential risk. And that means that C equals 0 doesn't mean like no AI at all. It just means no AI into the territory where it starts being risky. Okay. Does that all make sense? Okay. And we'll say that the payoff of the lab given survival is just linear in C, but with some K representing its payoff if it chooses C equals 0. Okay, so if it just stops at like GPT-5 or whatever, then it gets K, or whatever the highest risk-free C is. This seems like a real restriction, but this is also without loss of generality, because we can just re-denominate units of capabilities in like utils for the lab. We haven't said anything about what a unit of C means, right? So we can just sort of stretch out the lab's utility function so that, yeah. What it means to have one more unit of capabilities is just one more util for the lab. Okay, that's the game. You choose S, lab chooses C to maximize P times C plus K, which is U. Why this order of play? So if the lab moves first, then of course there's nothing all that interesting. You just want to pick S as high as possible, and you're having the full naive effect on the probability of survival, which is, that should be an up arrow there. Sorry about that. More safety, more survival. There's no compensation because you know, first the driver decides how fast to drive, and then you get to come in with the seatbelt, and you know. In reality, of course, people are responding to each other's behavior with lags, and there's no clear like first mover and second mover. Maybe if you're going to flatten that whole process into a one stage game, the closer analogy would be the simultaneous move case. And so the results that we'll find are kind of like an upper bound on the risk compensation effect. We're getting the maximal amount of risk compensation by having you choose S first and I'm choosing C second. All right. Another thing you might ask is why you're the only one doing safety work. Of course, in reality, labs do a lot. I guess they're the main people doing it these days. This is because if what you're doing is the sort of safety work that the labs are already doing, this is just equivalent to increasing their workforce, basically. At least if they have at least one employee on the margin that they can reallocate between the C sector and the S sector, then you're just jumping into the pool and they just like reallocate in a way that they would if you jumped into the C sector instead. Okay, so I'll talk actually about what happens if you just increase the lab's workforce, what will happen to equilibrium safety. But that's just a kind of pretty different game from the risk compensation type story where your increase in S responds, motivates more C, like with the drivers in the cars. So it's kind of a different and maybe less interesting game. Another reason to focus on this game though, is that in order to have a, because of this fact that if you do safety work that they're already doing, they can reallocate. For you to have a kind of reliable counterfactual increase in the amount of safety work that's gotten done, you should probably want to do the kind of safety work that doesn't just fund with them. And there are many places doing somewhat obscure evaluations of model capabilities that the main labs are not doing. And so I should have added some references, but like this is a possibility. There is some S out there you can do, which probably kind of contributes to safety and is not funding as much as the sort of work that the labs have specialized in. Okay, just as an example, any questions on that? On like the setup of the game or the motivation? Okay, so as an example of a survival function, a function from choices of C and S to probability of survival, to begin to build intuition, let's go with this, e to the negative C over S, where there's no upper bound to C. C bar is infinite. So what this is saying is the probability just sort of falls with with higher C, and how fast it falls depends on S. If you double S, then you can, like if you've doubled S here, that means that C can be twice as high, and you get the same probability of survival. This has been an example of how a survival function might look. So if you want to if you want to figure out what S you want to pick, the first step is to figure out what C they're going to respond with for any given S that you pick. We'll call that best response function C star of S. And the, so first order condition, right? You just differentiate their utility function, which is probability of survival times payoff given survival, set it equal to 0, chain rule. So they're differentiating with respect to, maybe I should have said C star, but anyway, -1 over S times e to the negative C over S, C plus K, derivative of the first times the second, plus the first times the derivative of the second with respect to C, that's 1. And then move this over to the other side. Cancel the e to the negative C over S. And you get that. Or putting S over there, subtracting K, C star equals S minus K. Now that implies that if S is less than K, C star would be negative. Well, I haven't allowed it to be negative, but it'll be the maximum of 0 and S minus K. Okay. I think Eveline, are you okay? Is everyone okay? Okay. So to figure out the equilibrium probability of survival, you just plug the C star in to the survival function, and you get e to the negative S minus K over S, which is e to the negative 1 plus K over S, which means that if K equals 0, meaning, if the lab is indifferent between life now with GPT-5 or 6 or whatever the most capable model is that poses like no risk, right? Indifferent between that and existential catastrophe. We have to do better than that for it to even be worth living. So if K equals 0, then your safety work has no effect in this case. And if K is greater than 0, if they'd rather be alive than, if life now is better than death for them, then the equilibrium probability of survival actually decreases in S here. The more safety you do, the lower the equilibrium probability of survival. Okay? Yikes. So what's going on? Here's an analogy that might be closer to home. Where's Pedro here? Oh, no, sorry. Pedro Laboni will call this price theory. But anyway, think of that e to the negative C over S curve that we saw before as a budget constraint. So the lab likes C and the lab likes surviving, P, probability of surviving. But it faces this constraint imposed by the safety that you've done. And but let's call it like the two goods, potatoes and carrots, for probability of survival and capabilities, rather than probability of survival and capability. Okay. Increasing S here is decreasing the price of carrots. We saw that the constraint was stretched horizontally. So you had this budget constraint, and then you wind up with that one. And that's just kind of like, if you had a triangular budget constraint in potatoes and carrots, and you lower the price of carrots, you can afford the same number of potatoes as before if you spend your whole budget on potatoes, but you can afford more carrots for any number of potatoes. So it's just equivalent to decreasing the price of carrots. At most, one potato is ever going to be affordable. You can't make it the case that you can get more than 100% chance of survival. But fixing P, doubling safety means twice as many carrots affordable in that example. Now, given K equals 0, you've got Cobb-Douglas preferences over potatoes and carrots. because P times C plus K, where K is 0, is just PC. And as we know, you're going to spend the same fraction of your budget on each of the two things, regardless of their prices, if you've got Cobb-Douglas preference. And so if you have the price of C, you're just going to double the quantity you buy of C without changing the quantity of P that you buy. The equilibrium probability of survival will be the same. It'll be independent of the safety that you do. And if K is positive, this is what your utility function looks like. I'm just, splitting it apart from P times C plus K, which is a little bit closer to the perfect substitutes case. You can kind of see that, right? You've got the Cobb-Douglas bit, and then you've got the additive bit over here. If it was just like C plus KP, it would be perfect substitutability. This would be Cobb-Douglas. You can work out the elasticity of substitution manually if you like, but hopefully that kind of makes it clear. And so spending is going to shift toward the cheaper good. So if you're making carrots cheaper by increasing S, you're going to shift away from potatoes to carrots. You're going to lower the probability of survival in exchange for increasing the capabilities. The way to think about it is the lab's thinking, I wouldn't have bought much C before since I was fine with just consuming P. That is, just living without the capability, right? Maybe just C would have been 0, and that would have been optimal. I wouldn't have driven a car. It was too dangerous. But now at least I'll drive a little bit now that the car is safer, right? Probability of crashing can only go up from 0. Whereas in the K less than 0 case, it's more like, I was going to build it anyway. And you can see that in the extreme. Like for C less than K, I actually want to die, right? If K is less than 0. So if it was going to build it anyway, then making it safer can't hurt. Okay. Just to emphasize, it's about the way in which you're stretching out the possibilities frontier rather than the shape of the initial possibilities frontier. Let's say it's not like, let's say there is a C bar at any given, for any given S you've chosen, and it's maybe this is more intuitive kind of, you know what I mean? It's not like it's safe, and then suddenly you get this cliff where you start quickly lowering the chance of survival as capabilities rise, but rather it just kind of gradually gets riskier as you raise capabilities or something. Well, it's still the Cobb-Douglas sort of logic is still going to apply. Given K equals 0, if you stretch out the constraint, that's like lowering the price of carrots, and that won't change the equilibrium demand for potatoes. An example that really is different is if you change the relationship between C and P like that. So here, even though, yeah, sure, up here, when P is around 1, there's nothing you can do. There's like not much you can do to lower the price of potatoes. It could totally be that like locally around here, you can lower the price of potatoes by a lot without kind of lowering the price of carrots. The key to think about is like whether you're raising safety around current capabilities without doing so ever more for ever higher levels of capabilities. To think about the carrots, if you kind of systematically lower the price of carrots, the more you buy, the more you save, right? The more carrots you buy, the more you're saving if you lower the price of carrots for every carrot. But if you just lower the price kind of around here, but actually if it tries buying just a few more carrots, it's spending just as much as it was spending before. That's a totally different problem, right? That's kind of you're more stretching vertically than stretching horizontally around that point. Okay. And so, I mean, I haven't written out the utility function, but you can kind of just see how that could happen. That the highest indifference curve it could get on could actually involve more safety after the safety work you've done than before. Does that help? Okay. Incidentally, this kind of, I think, makes it clear why you might expect more risk compensation in a race dynamic than in like an ordinary driving dynamic. If you yeah, don't think about the previous graph point, actually. Just think about the fact that C is indexing the utility that the player, that the lab or the racer gets for like driving at a given level of recklessness or something, right? Let's say all the drivers are equally good, and so your chance of winning is just how reckless you are. So if you're going to be maximally reckless, such that you have no chance of surviving, then you win for sure. And you just get like C bar equals 1. And then you make the whole thing safer, you make the cars safer, but it's still going to be the case that if you're like, 80% as reckless as you could possibly be, then your chance of winning is going to be like, I don't know, 80% or like whatever the distribution is that everyone's choosing of how reckless to be. But you're not getting like diminishing returns to recklessness. Whereas in a car, like maybe the car can only go so fast, and so driving a little more recklessly just gets you from like moving at 60 miles an hour to 65 miles an hour or whatever. And so if you start out being able to drive this fast, and you make it that the car can drive like a little bit faster, but it's safer at any given speed, and that effect is big enough that like you want to drive in a way where you're driving a little faster, but you're way safer. Whereas in the NASCAR case, it's like sort of baked into the definition of C. It's how reckless you are relative to other people, and there's kind of no way to change the shape of the curve. Okay, I understand that that we're a few minutes over, but just briefly, let's say we are in the case where your work just funges with the labs, so getting into the field is just like increasing its workforce. As a rule of thumb, you're going to get a U-shaped impact on the probability of survival, usually. It's just totally intuition, but the thought is, well, if it started out with no workforce at all, C was 0, so P was 1. At first, you kind of just make it possible to start actually building the thing, to actually start making cars or whatever, or AI systems. That's got to lower the probability of survival. But then as long as there is some maximal like level of capabilities in sort of denominated in units of utility, then eventually you might as well just use your extra resources to kind of increase safety. Right? There's no like, you've bought all the carrots you can in the store, and so if you've got extra money, yeah, might as well buy potatoes for basically any utility you might have. Yeah. This is closely related to something I'll talk about tomorrow. Very suggestive non-causal evidence, but you often see this hump-shaped relationship in sort of technologies where like before they're introduced, obviously they're not doing any damage. They're first introduced and we are kind of willing to use them a bit even though they're risky, and then we kind of develop ways to make them more capable, but also we, as we max out on ways to like get use out of them except for making them safer, we just sort of, in the limit, work on making them safe. So this is like global air accident fatalities over time. This was all about like you in the lab having different preferences. You could also have different beliefs. You can look at that if you're interested. I just want to jump to the takeaways. So first, I think this is like a real phenomenon. Sometimes you should expect it even to be more than full, where like safety work doesn't just do less good than you would have thought, but that it actually backfires. In practice, I think it is usually only partial for a number of reasons. One is that lag between your move and the others. Remember, this was an upper bound, I said at the beginning, because it was just saying you move first, then the lab. Given that, to some extent, you might just be coming up with a way to do some like fine tuning on a model that maybe ideally would have been a little safer to begin with, or some safer way of deploying a model that ideally would have been a little safer to begin with. You are actually just kind of adding on top. You're not kind of you're adding safety on top of a system that's already been developed, not changing what they do in response to the extent that kind of they're moving first and you're moving second. Incidentally, sorry, I meant this to come in one at a time, but incidentally, this makes it hard to determine the size of the effect in any domain. So you can't just say, well, hold on, like I did some safety work and it didn't seem to do any damage. It can be that like you're contributing to this equilibrium where the creators of the dangerous technology anticipate that their sloppy work will be patched up later by people like yourself. And so I think sometimes you should just kind of think through the game theory rather than looking entirely to common sense. But anyway, another reason why in practice this effect is usually only partial is because like eventually we get near the kind of upper bound of like, you know, if we just flew planes more recklessly and we gave up on safety, that wouldn't actually buy us much more utility. And so, you know, anyway. So anyway, as I said, this can change if we're in a race dynamic because then there's a huge utility payoff to being like the most reckless relative to the second most reckless. So that's a shame, right? An airline doesn't get like the whole market by flying like a tiny bit faster than the next airline. But maybe that'll kind of be the case in AI as it is in like a literal car race. What does this imply about what we should do? Look for safety work in which there is that long lag. Maybe, yeah, kind of try to make systems safer that were going to be deployed anyway, rather than like unlocking whole new realms of capabilities that probably otherwise would have been a long way off. Or at least, you know, do work that does not, given the perceptions of the labs, does not kind of motivate a change in technological development in the dangerous direction. And then, yeah, in this sort of like worst case scenario I was laying out at the beginning, you want to do work that's relevant to actors with lower k if it's sort of lowering the price of carrots, and higher k if it goes the other way around. Okay, so this is just totally speculative, but I'm already way over. I just thought I'd leave you with those thoughts. Thanks.